Nord Express, Triton Leader, Barcarena, Flamenco.
North Express, Flamingo.
No, call me back when 8 miles from the sea buoy. We have traffic.
G'day, welcome to Cuba de Rio. I'm Matt Scolle, and it's been 2 weeks for those of you that listen regularly, and this episode will go a long way to explain why, because I have been sailing in the Caribbean and the Panama Canal, and in this episode we will cross the Panama Canal from the Pacific side through to the Caribbean, and I just had a brilliant time, but it wasn't without its hardships and tribulations, hence the backing track here. It took ages to get through that first lock, and so it felt so much like knocking on heaven's door, and for an atheist like me, it's going to be tough getting into heaven, I assure you now. But anyway, a great trip. I was traveling with these two abuelos. These two abuelos, great Canadian guys, Rob and Steve. And Steve owned the boat Ariel, which is a 29-foot California-made yacht. So, yeah, had a great time with these guys, and hope you enjoyed the show. Right now we are drag racing a shipping container vessel down the main channel of the Panama Canal. We are still in the Pacific Ocean on the Balboa lock system side in the Ariel. Ariel is a Canadian Steve's boat. It's a 29-foot yacht with a single mast, and we're sailing this through the Panama Canal and then on to the island of San Andres, which is a belonging of Colombia. So, what's going to happen is we're about to pass through a number of locks. It has been a rather dull day because we were supposed to leave and go through all the Panama Canal at 6 this morning. However, it's turned out that we got bumped backwards to a 6:15 slot at night. So the whole day has been us playing cards, cooking, and listening to Flamenco Island on the radio. And it's been keeping us entertained because a lot of people have been waiting, and one bloke got rather angry at the control tower who couldn't do anything about it. The serene quiet of the Caribbean Ocean. But not quite. We had a change of plans last night because that boat we were drag racing last night was the second last boat to go through the Panama Canal, and then that passed us, and then the next boat passed us as well, and our little engine couldn't get us to the lock in time, and so it closed without us, and we did not cross the Panama Canal, and so it has thrown the plans in disarray. We've had the rats have left the ship, so there's been an exodus of all the other rope handlers on board, and we're desperately trying to see if we can get a transit tomorrow through the canal by day, which is when they send the slower boats. I don't know why we ended up at night time, but it didn't work out for us. But anyway, we're still gunning for the transit. We've got Captain Steve on shore trying to sort out all the bureaucrats, because there's a report out there that says we can only go 3 knots, which is 2 knots below the required speed to go through the canal, and we're trying to counter that with our own evidence, so we'll see if we actually get through the canal and into the Caribbean Ocean. It's been 4 long days since our failed attempt at going through the canal, and we've been anchored at the Balboa Yacht Club for all that time. Luckily, it's got Wi-Fi. But anyway, today we're gunning it. We're motoring out to one of the islands that surrounds the Panama Bay, and we need it to go there because the water here at Balboa Yacht Club, about 500 meters from the Bridge of the Americas, is bloody polluted. It is absolutely disgusting. There's so much oil So much trash coming out of that canal. It's gross. So we took it out to these islands to give the boat a clean, scrub off the bottom and everything, and now she's gained 0.2 knots. And so now she goes at 5.6 into a headwind. So we're going to make it through the canal. And it's just been great. Well, I say great. It's been long and dull, but the moments of excitement have been poignant, let's say, because they punctuated the absurd boredom that is sitting on a boat doing nothing for days and days and days. But it's a good place to be bored because you've got constant like distractions going by. For example, we've fallen in love, Rob, Steve and I, with the Langer Whopper, which is the dredger that goes up and down the canal continually. And like the Langer Whopper is beautiful. It's this huge green boat that's just got swirling water from all its vacuum cleaners sucking up the stuff around it. It's impressive, and we always put on German accents as it goes by. No, I ist un Langen Whopper, yeah. But that's about it. Aside from that, the other excitement's been a couple of boats going through with wind turbines on them, and I've loved these because the blades are absolutely gigantic. They can only fit on 2 sets. Well, they're stacked up there's probably about 24 blades on each stack, and there's 2 stacks, so 48 blades in total, but they can only fit them lengthways down the boat, with the blades sort of crisscrossing like interlocked fingers. And I just don't know how people cannot be excited by the project ahead of us, transforming this economy to green energy. It's just like, it's everything we love. It's big things moving on even bigger things. It's just, I love it. It's so heartening to see these things going past. But then, after a hard day's cleaning the bottom of the thing, scraping off barnacles, we were back to the Balboa Yacht Club, where we continue to drink amounts of alcohol that are far too much for us. And it's my job tonight to go Shanghai some backpackers on board, and the 27th we're going through that damn canal. We're going through her, so stick around. This is it, transit day. We're headed through the canal at 9:30 with a tourist ferry, and it's hard to capture the mood on board here because we're very close to the Miraflores Lochs, but we're like the old established crew. We still feel that Panama's going to stick one expensive cock in our ass before we get through, but then we've got these 3 novice line handlers on board too who are going to help us get through, and they're unknowing to the hurt that Panama can cause to a little boat like us. So we'll see. We're off. That's the main thing. That is the rumble of the Miraflores lock. We are inside. We're going through the canal, baby. And we've got a metal-to-metal seal of the doors behind us there. And we're rising at about a foot per second. There's ladders to escape up the sides of this lock. And one rung is being covered about every second. So we are rising bloody fast. The water is bubbling out from all around us. This is properly exciting. And this is the first of 2 locks. This is going to be cool. It might be worth mentioning we're in here with 3 other vessels, a tug, a gigantic shipping container vessel at the front of the lock there, and then we've got the tourist vessel next to us, which is making all that noise. So sorry if we don't get all the noises of the lock, but what can you do? It's worth remarking in the relative quiet of a full lock that the amount of wildlife around the Panama Canal is quite surprising, because the amount of water moving here sucks in a lot of fish, and then the presumably all the turbulence and the like breaks their little spines, and so there's birds here picking off dead fish all the time. We even spotted a 3-metre long crocodile swimming around in the estuary just below us. But the Panama Canal turned 100 a couple of years ago in 2014, and it's remarkable that the other lane of the Panama Canal is closed for maintenance at the moment. There's 2 lanes here at the Miraflores Lochs, and the other one is entirely closed with workmen buzzing all over it, maintaining her 100-year-old concrete cancer. She doesn't look too good from close up, I tell you now. Cheers, man. Cheers. Well done. Made it through the canal. Hey. Lightweight. We're in the snaking canyon of the Panama Canal. The These walls are amazing. We're going past mountains that men have dug a hole through, and like you can see the 100-plus-year-old boreholes where they blew large amounts of dynamite to clear this valley in which the canal sits. But it's been fascinating driving along here because we just passed a jail, and it's a strange place to put a jail, but it's got a very interesting cellmate in which a very interesting inmate rather in Noriega, who was the Panamanian dictator until 1989 when the US invaded Panama under, I think it would have been George H. Bush back then, but they invaded Panama, retook the canal and kicked out Noriega and charged him with a bunch of drug charges. So we had lunch recently, so I've got the burps. But anyway, so he's there and he's got a view of his very own canal which he was shipping Colombian product through back in the day. But anyway, I was listening intently to the tourist boat beside us, and there was quite a few interesting facts that I probably should have researched before coming on the canal itself. But I didn't know, but at the time, the Canal's lochs were the largest concrete structure that they had ever built. And so the men and the engineers didn't even know how long the concrete formulas they were using would last in terms of a canal. And so to make sure that it would last the distance, they built the walls 55 foot thick. And we're sailing on the level of the lake, Lake Gatun, which is 27 meters above sea level. So each of those steps of the lochs, we went up 9 meters a time. So 3 times we went up there. And the French, when they had their crack at making the canal back in the 1880s, they were beset by diseases and all sorts of horrible things, and so they only managed to do about 1/7 of the canal work that needed to be done, and that's left the Americans quite significant amount of work. De Lesseps, the guy that did the Suez Canal, also wanted to make the Panamanian Canal sea level canal. That's a weird one to say. But he wanted to make it all sea level, and that would have required too much work. I mean, even with the canal that we've got today, of the 75,000 men that worked on it, men and women, there were a few women amongst them. I spotted them in the museum there. Over 15,000 of them died here due to tropical diseases. They managed to eradicate yellow fever while they were down here through a program of like chlorine and keeping puddles and things in check. But still, that is a huge proportion of your workforce to lose to a project like this, even though it was in the early stage of the 20th century. But it is an amazing canal and an incredible feat of human achievement. And the fact that so many lives were lost make the end product that much more poignant in its success, even 100 years later. We're gliding across the aquamarine waters of Lake Gatun now, and it's an amazing little lake because it was all flooded rainforest before it was a canal, and so it's effectively like Lake Jindabyne, in which it's man-made, and they just flooded whatever was there. So there was some land grants given to people to cut trees down and the like, but right now, climate change is having some interesting effects on the Panama Canal because it's fresh water fed from all the rivers and the like that run down from the mountains here. And those rivers have not been filled effectively for a couple of seasons now because the El Nino has been in such strong effect. And so trees that have been drowned for over 100 years are now showing their tops again. And there's a small forest of trees just off to our port side there, nautical term, that's cropped up, and it's incredible to think they have not seen or tasted the air for over 100 years. That's just insane. This is the way that we're changing this planet of ours, and it's producing the most strange phenomenon, just both natural and artificial. It's just bizarre. Last day going through the canal, and she sent us a mixed bag, sweet and sour, classic canal Firstly, fucking Astro,
Okay, give me a slug on the ball.
the guy that fucked us with the report of 3 knots, is our pilot through these parts of the loch. And secondly, we get to go through with one of the biggest vessels that the canal can fit at its current capacity. So we're going through with one of those 12 10-story car loaders called the Green Cove, and it is absolutely gigantic. It's going to be fun. Well, it speaks to the lack of excitement when going down the Gatun Lochs, is that I didn't even notice we had started moving. Like, we already dropped 4 meters, and I was like, oh, what? The walls are taller. So, yeah. Going up, at least you notice, but it's going down at a very similar rate. I'd say one rung about a foot per 2 seconds. So still, I wanted there to be like waterfalls pouring off the sides and giant whirlpools in the middle where the plug holes are, but nothing of that sort. Very, very anticlimactic. Going down the second loch now, and the reason we're actually on board, me and all the other backpackers here, is we are here as line handlers. So as the block fills up or the loch empties, we are holding these huge blue ropes that help guide the boat away from the sides walls of the loch. However, this is the noise of the line handlers for these epic huge ships, and what it is in fact this magnificent little train network that follows the lochs the entire way from the lake to the sea. And it's on both sides, both at Miraflores here and here at Gatun. But these little trains have cable systems, they communicate with bell rings, they're adorable. They're my favourite part of the entire thing. I love these. So that's the canal noise. Definitely managed to get better atmos on those second set of lots, just because I managed to attach the mic to the mast and could turn it on and off whenever I want while handling the ropes. The first lock was a little bit trickier. But coming up is an interview with one of my crewmates. This is a Scotsman, Ross, and he was a good guy. He stuck through. We had 3 crews go through this boat just because the amount of time we're stuck on that Pacific side, and Ross was part of crews 2 and 3, and he's a very useful member of the third and successful crew. So I'll let him introduce himself. Oh Lord, I'm stuck in a low tide again.
Hi, my name's Ross. I'm from Scotland. I've been with Matt on the boat for the last few days.
And where did you start your trip, Ross?
I started my trip up in Mexico, in Cancun. I've been travelling south, essentially in a straight line since then, and we're now in Panama.
And how did it come to be that you're on the sailing vessel Ariel now?
Well, I was sitting in my hostel a few nights back when you came in.
Rudely beat you over the head and threw you on board.
Essentially, yeah. Plied me with cheap lager and informed me that I was to set sail on the canal in a few days' time.
Yeah. And it didn't work out quite as planned at first because we got fucked around by Astro and his damn report that screwed us for days and days. And so we lost you and your first mate, Ali. How long were you travelling with him?
I was travelling with Ali for about 6 weeks, and yeah, unfortunately he couldn't make it after the delays because he had a flight to catch. But I'm still sticking around, so we've ended up finally making it through the canal.
Yeah, and what was it like for you? Like, I enjoyed it. It's been broadcast what I thought about it, but what do you think?
Excellent. Yeah, it's been a really good experience. Totally unique kind of experience to have on this trip. I'd been to the canal a couple of days before to have a look at it from the tourist viewing gallery, which you see a fraction of one of the locks from. So it's been really cool to actually get to sail through it. I don't think that many backpackers get to do that.
No. So what was your motivation once some random Australian came up to you to jump on a sailing vessel and go through the canal?
It just sounded like something I didn't really expect to get the chance to do. So I think when you get the chance to do something different, something cool like that, then you got to jump at it. And of course, it was free board for 2 nights, so it's always going to help.
Appeals to the Black Panther sensibilities as well. And what part did you enjoy? Going up more, going down the lake? What sort of things did you?
Good question. I think going up was probably the highlight, especially since we went up before we came back down. Then those were the first locks we went through, so that was probably the most entertaining bit. I think we had a bit more rapport with the boat we were tied to on the way up than the way back down as well.
True. Yeah.
And the lake was great as well, obviously.
So what's I've been on the Miraflores tourist viewing platform as well. So what's the difference once you're in the canal versus when you're looking out at all the bigger scope of things?
Well, you kind of feel like you're part of the whole experience, the whole sort of technology that's going on,
functioning of the whole thing.
It's a huge, massive, sort of globally identifiable piece of work, and you're part of the process.
You're in the arteries of the global economy. You're helping it flow along, man.
Exactly.
It's freaking cool.
You're part of the process instead of being, watching from a distance.
100%. And I don't know, what was a surprising element of going through the canal? For me, it was all the ecology that somehow had sprung around the canal.
That's true, yeah.
We had a croc in the loch today. I don't know if he survived that experience, but the fish certainly didn't.
No, that's true. No, I don't think we saw any living fish in there. We saw a fair few upturned fish.
No, poor buggers.
And then was that a crab we saw earlier today as well?
Yeah, we saw a crab swimming. Never seen a crab swimming. That was bizarre.
Yeah.
But what was the most surprising thing for you then?
Yeah, the ecology was pretty surprising. To be honest, it surprised me how smoothly it ended up going after all the doom mongering from our two guides. I was convinced there wasn't a chance we were making it through without losing at least one crew member. So it wasn't too bad at the end.
You came on at a tough spot for the crew, man. We had suffered 5 days of setbacks, and we didn't trust a Panamanian to get us through the fucking canal.
Yeah, well, they didn't trust us to get through it either, to be fair.
No, Jesus Christ.
Especially not this morning.
Yeah. And so what have you been doing, how have you fitted this trip in, and what's it fitted around?
It's basically a big trip after finishing university last year, so it's kind of a post-uni gap year, as I guess we would call it, back in the UK. And the idea is to travel for a fair number of months and then head back home, face the real world. But let's not think about that right now.
It's daunting. Yeah. Black hole. And how many months have you been at it so far?
I've been about 3.5 months so far.
Nice. And what have you got left? I know you don't have a flight booked, but what are you feeling? Could you go another 4 months, another 2?
I mean, I'm sailing down to Colombia next week. The idea is to have Colombia as the last destination. So yeah, probably about 1.5 to 2 months left, I would say.
Yeah, nice. And what were you studying back at uni there? Because this is the crux of the podcast here.
Well, yeah, my main subject was history, which is something we've been discussing in terms of history of this region, I would say.
And did you ever specialise in any part of the history of this region, or? I
have looked at history of Caribbean, Latin America, all those kind of regions, and obviously we're in Panama right now, so I think you wanted to talk a bit about that.
Go for it. We'll start us off, and then I'll inquire from there.
Sounds good. Well, when we were talking briefly earlier, you sound quite interested in Panama's probably the one. Being from Scotland, Panama's probably the one country in Central America that has a real kind of historical relevance to Scotland, in terms of it's one of the main reasons that Scotland and England came to be in union back in the day. Scotland
417 years ago, was it? Something of that nature, that you timed the independence vote to coincide with that?
No, it was about Well, it was 1707 was the union, so 300 and a bit years.
Yeah. Close enough. It was a good estimate.
Yeah, not 100 years out, but we'll give you that. So Scotland's one attempt at a colony in the New World was Panama back in the 1690s.
Really?
Tried to create a colony, New Edinburgh, I believe the plan was to call it, in Darien in Panama, so very near the jungle and horrible, terrible locations.
Right now, where there's no roads or any sort of civilization
really
whatsoever.
Yeah.
Well done, Scotland. Good choice.
So, which failed for a mixture of reasons, including the diseases, climate not particularly suitable to Scottish people, and just basically being completely outnumbered by the Spanish when they arrived. So this largely bankrupted Scotland. A few years later, England bailed them out, and we ended up with the Union.
Oh, all right, okay. And how's that been going for you?
That depends who you ask.
And so, apart from that, the history of this region, very much based in colonialism and how those great powers have treated the local populations, the African populations they brought over. So, what's your impression of it all? And
I think you're right. A lot of it comes down to colonialism, especially the countries we've been to. Anyway, it's mainly been Spanish colonialism. I think, obviously, with sort of in Panama and Costa Rica in particular, we've seen the real kind of cultural differences between the Pacific side and the Caribbean side. The Caribbean side tend to have a lot more kind of plantation history, so you've got a lot of Caribbean culture, Afro-Caribbean culture, a lot of places that'll speak English almost as much as they speak Spanish, or different Creole versions of English anyway.
Yeah.
And then obviously you go over to the Pacific and it's back to a very sort of Spanish style Latino type culture again.
And of all that colonial activity that you've seen over history and whatever, I don't know, is what strikes you of has it been beneficial for the region? Has it been too exploitative? I don't know. You feel it's left it in a better or worse state?
Well, I think it's tough to say. I think it's been very exploitative.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think that's probably the main legacy you'd say that colonialism has. But I mean, as a tourist, it's left us some nice little colonial towns to visit, but it's not done much for the local people.
But they all look the same. They all look the same.
They do all look pretty similar.
Oh, goddamn. Antigua, once you've been in Cuba, man, all the colonial cities, they're 100 plus years younger, and they look exactly like freaking Trinidad in Cuba. There's you can't escape them. And I don't know, how do you think that aside from the sort of racial differences between the Pacific and Caribbean, how do you think that's reflected in the current state of these Central American nations, or the impact that history's had on them?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of them now seem to have as much, I guess, especially in Panama, there's as much influence from the US as there is from European countries nowadays. So it's almost like they've kind of got rid of that whole European colonialism thing, but now they've got huge dependence on the US. There's so much US culture around, especially as we're sitting in the Panama Canal. It's basically an American thing, isn't it? So
it's the 52nd state.
Yeah.
The Zonians, man, they were here. Yeah, I don't know. It's a strange thing. A couple of books I've read recently really touch on that, especially Open Veins of Latin America is a great book. I forget the author. Galeno is his last name, but that's basically a very politicized century by century breakdown of how Latin America has been screwed by the different waves. And what surprised me actually was how internationalized the economy was back then at the start of the colonial era. We talk about it now we're looking at freaking giant container ships loading up in the docks here at Gatun, but even then it was an internationalized economy, which is bizarre to think of. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, that's one of the main reasons that you ended up with so many European powers over here, was worked out they could get gold pretty cheap, get labour pretty cheap, and yeah, it was pretty much as soon as the colonies were started, there was massive shipping between here and Europe, but obviously without the global advantage of a big canal in between.
True. And the thing that I found interesting about particularly Galeno's book, the other book I've read recently was Salt. It's like a history of salt, and that's a brilliant book. Like, it's such a narrow topic, and then it's just opens up to all these different things. You can't wage war without salt because you need preserved foods to feed your troops and everything, and it was a tough commodity to get back in the day. But especially in this, I think his name's Eduardo Galeno, Open Bay into Latin America. He talks about how none of the wealth that Spain and Portugal extracted from this continent really found its way into their economies, because they were so indebted to either the bloody Netherlands or to England alike, and it turns out you guys ended up benefiting more from their colonial exploits in this part of the world. God damn you.
If we're mentioning books that are relevant to this part of the world, I read a book a couple of years ago. I think it's called something like The Box. Anyway, it's a fairly recent book, and it's about basically the history of shipping containers. So again, like the Salt book, not something that would necessarily jump out at you on a shelf, but really, really interesting. Basically, the argument is that shipping containers made more impact on the modern world than any invention in the last 150 years because it has basically revolutionised the global economy. And apparently before we had, uniform containers, then up to 50% of goods that were sent around the world would either go missing or never make it. And as soon as the shipping container was introduced, we've ended up with so much more efficiency almost immediately, and that's how we've ended up with much global trade.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I think, it's it's a pretty debatable argument that it's the most important invention, but it's an interesting case.
It's certainly up there.
Yeah.
And I guess all these companies would have been trying to make their size the standard and all that sort of thing before it was actually standardized in the 1960s or 70s, whenever they decided on the size we've got now. And that reminds me that poor Venezuela's in debt to the tune of some $2 billion because it's not exporting anything, and so all these shipping containers are showing up on its shores but not leaving, and so the shipping container companies are trying to get them back but charging these exorbitant, you've had them too long, an overdue fee on a book, and
but
they're screwed, man. They can't pay it because the oil prices bombed on them and everything. Oh, it's so interesting. Anyway, that's brilliant. Any other book recommendations? What have you been reading on the trip?
I'm not sure I've been reading anything worth recommending on the trip. It's been it's
Smut.
largely been...
He's been reading 50 Shades on board here.
It's largely been whatever I've been able to pick up in hostel book exchanges, which has been entertaining in itself, seeing some of the things that pop up in there.
A lot of Dan Brown.
A lot of Dan Brown. I'd love to know who it was that's travelling and reading 50 tips for being a single mother, but I can see that one staying in the hostel book exchange for a while.
Do you happen to remember any of the tips for being a single mother?
I didn't read it, but it just really jumped out at me as an unusual thing to see from someone who's travelling with or without a child.
So what are you doing in Colombia?
I don't have massive plans so far in Colombia.
No, that's how I've been doing it as well, man. You just sort of meander along, and if things happen, they happen.
I'll arrive in Cartagena. I've got a few places I want to visit, so at some point I need to work out the most efficient route to travel between them, and then presumably I'll be finishing up in Bogota to fly home from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. Well, cheers. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and I hope you had a good time coming across the canal.
I had a lovely time coming across the canal.
Not too bad. The second time.
Yeah. Now that we've made it across, it's been great.
So good. Cheers. And that's it for another week. These episodes will be pretty close together for those of you that listen with regularity. So make sure you tune in next week, because that is where we power across the Caribbean towards Providencia, where I'm doing these intros and like. And I can tell you, it's a cool place, so stick around. If you enjoy the show, make sure you check out the photos, because they just give a great sense of scale to that whole canal. Canal itself, not so impressive, but the boats that squeeze through that little thing, just incredible. So yeah, check them out on the Facebook page. That's Cupid Rio on Facebook. And if you like the show, make sure you rate it on iTunes and tell a mate, as it really helps us out. So thanks, guys. We're doing really well, and we're moving on to Colombia next week. So stick around.